It was an early morning, and Judge Kesha Naomi was walking up to the courthouse steps. She was not wearing her judge's robe or fancy clothes. She was dressed just like a normal woman. She carried a shiny, expensive briefcase in her hand. Inside the briefcase were very important papers, case files for that day, notes she had written, and other official documents. To her, this was just another day of work. But to Officer Victor, it was the perfect time to be cruel. He looked at her walking up and thought something nasty and mean, another poor ghetto rat trying to sneak in where she doesn't belong. He stepped in front of her, blocking the way. His eyes glared at her with nothing but hatred. Then, smack! His open hand swung across her face so hard that her head whipped to the side. Her expensive briefcase flew out of her grip. The papers inside burst into the air, floating and scattering everywhere. It almost looked like confetti blowing across the courthouse steps, except these weren't party decorations. They were serious legal papers. Victor grabbed her roughly by the throat and shoved her back against the cold stone wall of the courthouse. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses," he said again, repeating his cruel words like poison. He twisted her arms painfully behind her back and slapped handcuffs on her wrists. The metal cut into her skin. Other police officers nearby saw what happened. Instead of helping, instead of stopping it, they laughed. Some of them even pulled out their phones and started recording, like it was a show. Kesha's jaw throbbed with pain where his hand had hit her. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She kept her eyes locked on the big bronze nameplate above the courthouse entrance. It read, "The Honorable Judge K. Naomi presiding." Only 20 feet away from her own courtroom, Judge Kesha Naomi was being beaten, insulted, and arrested by the very people who were supposed to defend the law she served. But she stayed calm. She stayed quiet. Inside the courthouse, Victor stood tall, straightening his uniform neatly. He cleared his throat. He knew what to do. He had done this before. This was his game. Tell the story his way. Twist the truth. Make himself look like the hero. He was good at it. And he knew that most of the time, the system always believed police officers over regular people, especially if those people looked like her. He stood before the temporary judge, Judge Harrison. Harrison was a pale, thin man in his 60s. "Your Honor," Victor said in a steady, practiced voice, "I was doing a normal security check when I saw a suspicious individual trying to sneak into the courthouse." He pointed at Kesha. She was sitting in the defendant's chair now, her hands still cuffed, her face bruised purple on one side. "The defendant," Victor continued, "was acting strangely. She refused to show me her identification. She got upset when I asked." Judge Harrison leaned forward, listening closely. He nodded as if he already agreed. "And what exactly did you observe, Officer Victor?" Victor answered quickly. She was not dressed properly for court. She was carrying what looked like stolen legal papers. The more he spoke, the bolder he felt. His lies flowed smoothly. "When I approached her," he continued, "she cursed at me and threatened me. She screamed that she was important, but these people always pretend. They say they're lawyers or judges or senators, just to escape the rules. I've seen it all before, Your Honor." Judge Harrison asked, "Did she try to flee or resist?" "Yes," Victor lied, his face perfectly serious. "She tried to escape. When I tried to stop her, she fought back. I had to use only the smallest amount of force, just enough to keep everyone safe." As he spoke, his hand shook just a little. That was the only clue he wasn't as confident as he looked. The stenographer in the corner typed furiously, capturing every single word. Every lie was now part of the record. In the back of the courtroom, a young law clerk frowned. Something about the woman sitting there didn't match the story Victor was telling. The prosecutor stood. "Officer Rodriguez, can you confirm what happened?" Rodriguez stood up, his uniform spotless. "Yes, ma'am. I saw the whole thing. The defendant tried to bypass security. Officer Victor was very professional." Judge Harrison nodded with approval. "And the assault?" the judge asked. Victor jumped in. "She hurt herself resisting, Your Honor. I only did what was necessary." He pulled out his phone. "I have a video," he said. "But the video only began halfway through the fight. My body camera broke this morning," he lied smoothly. "How convenient," Kesha whispered under her breath. "What was that?" Judge Harrison asked sharply. "Nothing, Your Honor," Kesha said calmly, though her eyes burned with controlled fury. Victor smiled and pressed on with his act. "This is the same story I've seen again and again. People break the law, and when they're caught, they pretend to be victims. She was trespassing, carrying stolen papers, and when I stopped her, She cried discrimination. It's a trick, Your Honor. The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, nodded. Officer, in your 15 years of service, have you seen this before? Too many times, Victor said, pretending to be filled with righteous anger. Some people think they're above the law. They use racism as an excuse to cover up their own crimes. It's insulting to true victims of racism. People in the courtroom nodded in agreement. They had heard stories like this on the news. It felt familiar, easy to believe. She said she was going to work, Victor said, mocking her with air quotes. But she had no proof. No ID. No real reason to be there. Another officer, Thompson, stepped forward. Your Honor, she had legal papers she shouldn't have had. It looks like fraud. She might be stealing identities. Fraud? Judge Harrison asked with interest. Yes, sir, Victor said quickly. The papers had judge names, case numbers, sensitive info. No regular citizen would have them. She was probably planning to pretend she worked here. The lies were thick now, filling the room like smoke. This is just another manipulation, Victor continued, puffing up with pride. She wants sympathy by crying about race. But really, she's just a criminal trying to game the system. She thinks she can walk into any space she wants, and when stopped, she screams discrimination. Well, not in my courthouse. The air went cold. Some staff shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Others kept their faces still. Your Honor, Prosecutor Walsh said, we ask for charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. The civil rights excuse is just a desperate trick. Victor allowed himself a small smile. Everything was going according to plan. I was merciful, he added proudly. She was unstable, maybe on drugs. Another cop might have used much harsher force. But I showed restraint. Judge Harrison nodded seriously. Your professionalism is noted, Officer Victor. Kesha sat quietly in the defendant's chair. Her hands were folded in her lap despite the cuffs. She looked calm. Peaceful even. But if anyone looked closely, they would have seen the tiniest smile at the corner of her lips. She was memorizing every single lie, every word. She was planning how to bring it all crashing down. She had the power to end his career. And he didn't even realize it. Anything else? Judge Harrison asked. Yes, Victor said proudly. This proves we need strong police. Some people only understand authority when it's backed by force. Today she learned that actions have consequences. Those words would come back to haunt him later. The state rests its case, the prosecutor said. The evidence shows she is guilty. Victor winked at Kesha as he stepped down, as if to say I win. But it would be the last moment of pride he ever felt in his career. The defendant may now speak, Judge Harrison said. His tone made it clear he thought this was just a formality before punishment. Kesha rose slowly. The handcuffs clinked as she moved. Her bruise was visible, her clothes messy, but she stood tall with quiet strength. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and powerful. The whole room shifted uneasily. Judge Harrison blinked. This wasn't what he expected from someone accused of crimes. First, Kesha said, I want to correct some lies from Officer Victor. She looked around, her eyes meeting each face that had helped support the false story. He said I was trespassing. That is false. I was on a public sidewalk at 8:47 a.m. walking toward the courthouse entrance. Sidewalks are public, Your Honor. The Supreme Court has already said that sidewalks next to government buildings belong to everyone. The stenographer paused, stunned. The prosecutor frowned. Next, Kesha continued, he said I carried stolen papers. That's not true. They are real legal documents, case files, judge memos, and letters. And I have the right to carry them in my professional job. Judge Harrison interrupted. And what is your job, miss? She smiled slightly. Naomi. Dr. Naomi. And we'll get to my job shortly. Victor felt ice creep down his spine. Something was wrong. Victor also claimed I cursed at him. I will use my right to stay silent about what I said. But I will tell you this, anything I said was only after he struck me first, with no warning, no reason, no law behind it. The law clerk in the back suddenly sat up straighter. That voice. That confidence. It seemed familiar. And about the body camera, Kesha continued firmly. Your Honor, you know this courthouse has many cameras. Every few feet. High-definition cameras that see everything. And all police cameras have automatic backups. Even if his camera failed, the system saved the files. Victor's face was drained of color.
He had forgotten.
I request this court to keep all video and audio evidence from this morning, between 8:45 and 9:05. This includes courthouse security cameras, police body cam backups, and the phone videos taken by officers.
Objection. The prosecutor shouted.
The defendant cannot demand evidence without a lawyer. Kesha turned her head slowly toward her. Her gaze was so sharp that the prosecutor actually stepped back. Your Honor, people defending themselves have the right to show evidence. That's the Sixth Amendment. And Brady versus Maryland says the prosecution must save any evidence that could prove me innocent. The courtroom froze in silence. This was not what anyone expected. Judge Harrison coughed nervously. Miss Naomi, you seem very knowledgeable about the law. Do you have training? Kesha's smile grew ever so slightly. I have some experience in the courtroom, Your Honor. Her eyes gleamed, full of hidden meaning. Victor finally understood. The woman he had slapped, humiliated, and lied about was no ordinary suspect. She was Judge Kesha Naomi, the very judge whose nameplate he had walked past, the very judge whose courtroom was only steps away. And now, it was no longer his game.
It was hers.
Kesha walked forward as much as the handcuffs around her wrists would let her. The cold metal bit into her skin with every step. She stopped in front of the evidence table. On the table were her things, scattered everywhere, like someone had dumped them out carelessly. She lifted her hand, the chain clinking loudly, and pointed at them. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding, I want to speak about what Officer Victor said about me. He called me suspicious. He said I wasn't supposed to be here, that I didn't belong in this courthouse. But that is not true. Her words made the room shift. Some people leaned forward, others whispered. Kesha bent her head toward the table. She tapped a piece of paper with her cuffed hand. This is my court calendar. It clearly shows that I was scheduled to be here today at 9 a.m. I had official work in this building. Everyone in the courtroom stared at her. The bailiff, a very large man named Henderson, who had worked in the courthouse for 12 long years, suddenly went completely still. His eyes narrowed. He stared at Kesha's face carefully, his expression slowly changing. At first he looked confused, then shocked, and then horrified. It was like recognition was creeping over him little by little, and when it finally hit him, he paled as though all the blood had drained from his face. Officer Victor said that I claimed to be someone important, Kesha continued. But I never said that. I never claimed anything like that. All I did was try to show him my identification card, the one that proves who I am. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he refused and attacked me. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Kesha lifted her chin. She looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with the people there. Your Honor, despite Officer Victor's violence, I still have documents with me that can prove my identity and prove why I was here this morning. The presiding judge, Judge Harrison, was sweating. He looked more and more uncomfortable. His voice cracked slightly as he asked, What kind of documents? Kesha moved very slowly. She slipped her hand into the inside pocket of her jacket, moving carefully so no one would think she was reaching for anything dangerous. Everyone in the room watched her every move. My judicial parking pass, she said, pulling it out carefully, issued by the courthouse's own administrative office. She placed it on the table. My building access card, she continued, which is programmed with my chamber's entry code. She placed it down too. And, she said, pulling out one last item, my official identification. The bailiff Henderson suddenly pushed himself up to his full height. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. His eyes were wide with shock, and his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. His face had gone pale as paper. Now he recognized her. The woman standing in handcuffs wasn't just anyone. She was someone he had seen almost every day for the last 3 years. Someone he had shown respect to every morning. Someone who had passed him in the halls in her black robe, nodding politely as she walked to the bench. Judge Kesha Naomi. Your Honor, Kesha said softly, her voice calm but powerful, I think there has been a very big mistake about who Officer Victor actually assaulted this morning. Her hand lifted, and she showed a leather credential wallet. Even from across the room, people could see the shiny gold seal of a judge gleaming on the front. The air in the courtroom grew thick and heavy. Perhaps, she said, her voice carrying the tone of command, we should recess. That way proper identification can be checked. Judge Harrison stared at the gold seal. Then he looked at Kesha's face. Then he looked at Henderson, who was nodding grimly, his lips pressed tightly together. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Harrison finally said hoarsely. His hand trembled as he struck the gavel. At the sound, Officer Victor suddenly felt his stomach twist. His whole world felt like it was falling apart. His face went red, then white, then red again. The room buzzed with whispers. Whatever game Victor thought he was playing, he was beginning to realize he didn't understand the rules at all. During the 15-minute break, the courthouse was filled with nervous whispers. People in the hallway gossiped, voices hushed but excited. Some staff members gasped when they heard what had just happened. Inside a small holding room, Kesha sat calmly in a metal chair.
Her wrists still ached from the cuffs.
Bailiff Henderson stood near the door, fumbling with his key ring, his big hands shaking. His usually steady fingers trembled so much he dropped the keys twice before catching them. His face was pale with horror. Finally he looked at her and whispered hoarsely, "Judge Naomi."
"Oh my God. Judge Naomi.
"I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. You weren't in your robes, you looked like any other person. And when they dragged you in like that..."
Jesus Christ.
Kesha gave him a small, tired smile.
"It's all right, Henderson.
You weren't part of this.
You didn't hurt me.
But I need you to do something for me."
"Anything, Your Honor."
"Anything at all," Henderson said quickly.
"Go to my chambers," she said firmly.
"Quietly.
Bring me my judicial robes.
The black ones with the gold trim." She paused, then added, "And Henderson, bring me my gavel. The engraved one from my swearing-in ceremony." "Yes, Your Honor," Henderson said, nodding so hard it looked like his head might fall off. He rushed out of the room, leaving Kesha alone with her thoughts. She leaned back in the chair, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply, centering herself like she had learned long ago. She thought about the last 23 years. She had been Judge Kesha Naomi, respected, fair, a protector of rights. Every day she had worn the robe, listened to people, and tried to keep justice alive. But this morning, in less than 15 minutes, she had been turned into a victim.
A woman in handcuffs. A so-called defendant.
Someone accused of trespassing in her own courthouse. But that wasn't the end of her story. She would not let it be. Her phone, which had been taken from her during the arrest but was finally returned, buzzed in her pocket.
She pulled it out.
Dozens of missed calls. Dozens of messages. Her clerk, Janet Morrison, had texted frantically. "Judge Naomi, where are you? The Peterson hearing is starting soon. The lawyers are waiting. Rumors are spreading that something happened to you.
Please call me."
Kesha quickly typed back, "Tell the Peterson attorneys we'll reschedule. Clear my afternoon calendar. Something important came up." She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed, Chief Judge Margaret Carter, the head of the entire judicial district.
She pressed the call.
"Margaret, it's Kesha."
"Kesha."
Margaret's voice was filled with relief.
"Thank God. We heard something happened. Are you all right?"
"I've been better," Kesha said dryly. "Margaret, I need you to do something for me. And I need you to do it now, without asking too many questions."
"Of course," Margaret said firmly.
"Anything you need. Contact courthouse security. Tell them to immediately save all the surveillance video from this morning. From 8:45 to 9:15. Every camera, every angle. Have them make multiple copies and store them in different places."
"Understand." There was silence.
Then Margaret asked quietly, "Kesha, what happened?" "A police officer named Victor just spent an hour in court telling everyone about how he bravely stopped a dangerous criminal trying to sneak into the courthouse." Margaret gasped softly.
Kesha's voice hardened.
"That dangerous criminal, according to him, was me. On my way to work, he arrested me. No, not just arrested me. He assaulted me. He slapped me. He called me a filthy animal. He said I belonged in a cage." There was silence on the line for nearly 30 seconds. "Dear God," Margaret whispered finally. "Kesha, do you want me to call the FBI? The Attorney General?" "Not yet," Kesha said calmly. "First, I need those videos secured. Then, I need you to order reviews of every single case Officer Victor has testified in over the past 5 years. Everyone. Leave no stone unturned."
"Done," Margaret said.
"But Kesha, you can't handle this yourself. You're directly involved. It's a conflict of interest." "And Margaret," Kesha said, her voice strong, "in about 10 minutes, I am going to walk back into that courtroom wearing my robes. Officer Victor will learn exactly who he assaulted this morning. And more importantly, he will learn that there are consequences." Henderson returned then, carrying a large garment bag and a wooden box. His face was still pale, but his eyes were full of determination. Your robes, Your Honor, he said, holding out the bag with both hands. And your gavel. Kesha unzipped the bag and pulled out the heavy black robes with gold trim. She held them for a moment, feeling their weight, remembering how many times she had worn them. Slowly, she slipped them on. The fabric rested on her shoulders like armor, like the mantle of authority she had carried for 2 decades. She opened the wooden box and lifted her ceremonial gavel. Its handle was smooth, engraved with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She held it firmly, feeling its comforting weight. "Henderson," she said, adjusting her robes. "When we return to the courtroom, I want you to announce it to me properly."
Yes, Your Honor.
"How should I announce it to you?"
She straightened to her full height.
Her eyes shone with fire.
Her voice was unshakable.
"The Honorable Judge Kesha Naomi, presiding." She turned to the small mirror on the wall. Her bruise was still visible on her cheek, a purple reminder of Victor's violence. But now it was more than that.
It was a symbol. A warning.
A sign that justice had been wounded, and that she would restore it.
All rise.
Henderson's booming voice thundered through the courtroom as everyone rushed to their feet. His voice was so commanding it rattled the air.
Court is now in session, he declared.
The Honorable Judge Kesha Naomi presiding. The words hit the room like a bolt of lightning. Officer Victor, leaning against the prosecutor's table, went stiff as a board. His face was drained of color. Judge Harrison, still sitting in the judge's chair, suddenly realized he had been occupying the wrong seat. His face turned pale as death. The prosecutor's mouth fell open in shock. Then Kesha Naomi appeared. She entered through the judge's private door, her robes flowing behind her, the gold trim gleaming under the lights. She carried her gavel, walking with the calm, measured steps of someone who had walked this path thousands of times before. The silence was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Not a single person dared to breathe. Kesha walked to the bench, and sat down. Slowly, deliberately. Her eyes swept the room. She saw every face, every expression of shock, fear, and dawning realization. "Officer Victor," she said softly, but her voice carried power. "You may remain standing." Victor looked like he might throw up. His legs trembled. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison stammered, rising quickly.
I mean.
"Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay," Kesha interrupted, her tone polite but firm. "You may return to your own docket. I'll handle this from here." Judge Harrison practically ran out of the courtroom, his robes flying like wings. Kesha turned her gaze on Victor. He was shaking so badly he could hardly stand.
"Officer Victor," she said.
2 hours ago you testified under oath. Do you remember your testimony?"
Victor stuttered.
"Let me refresh your memory," Kesha said coldly. "You said, and I quote, 'These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability.' Do you recall that?"
Victor nodded weakly.
"You also said I was another entitled activist looking for a payday. Is that correct?" The courtroom was so silent that every small sound seemed loud. And most memorably, her eyes hardened. "You said people like me needed to learn that actions have consequences. Do you remember that?" Victor could barely stay upright. His knees knocked together. Kesha reached under her bench and pulled out a tablet. She turned it toward the courtroom. "Officer Victor, I have some evidence." On the screen was crystal clear video from courthouse camera number 7, showing the entrance. "This shows the entire incident," she said.
The video began to play.
The courtroom gasped as they saw Kesha walking calmly toward the courthouse in her plain clothes. Victor stepped in front of her, blocking her way. His voice was heard clearly, "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in." Gasps filled the room. The video showed him slapping her, grabbing her throat, shoving her into cuffs. Then his words, "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." The sound echoed through the silent room. Several jurors who were waiting in the gallery stood and walked out, disgusted. "Officer Victor," Kesha said, pausing the video. "Do you see me threatening you? Swearing at you? Doing anything aggressive?" Victor said nothing. His silence screamed louder than words. "Now," Kesha continued icily, "let's discuss your claim that your body cam broke." She swiped to another file. "This is backup footage from your own body cam. It uploads automatically every 60 seconds to the county system. A system you apparently forgot about." The big screen in the courtroom flickered, and a new video began to play. Everyone turned to look. The sound filled the room, and once again, Officer Victor's voice came out of the speakers. But this time, it was even worse than before. This was not a short video. This was the full, uncut version. Nothing was taken out. Nothing was hidden. Victor's angry voice filled the courtroom like poison. "Look at this uppity woman," he snarled. "Thinking she can just walk into my courthouse like she owns the place." The way he said it made the room go cold. His voice dripped with hatred. "These people need to learn their place," Victor continued. "Time to teach another lesson." Gasps spread across the courtroom. People glanced at each other with wide eyes. At the prosecutor's table, Sandra Walsh, the woman supposed to be on the state side, was panicking. She quickly grabbed her papers, shoving them into her briefcase. She wanted to distance herself from the disaster exploding around her. Her face turned red with shame. She knew what was happening was catastrophic, and she didn't want her name tied to it. But Judge Kesha Naomi was not finished. She had more evidence. She had more truth to show. "Officer Rodriguez." "Officer Thompson," she said loudly, turning toward the two officers who had testified earlier. "You both told this court under oath that Officer Victor handled the situation with professionalism. You said he acted with respect. Do you want to change your statements now?" The two officers looked nervous. "I'm very nervous." Instead of answering, they started sliding toward the exit. They wanted to disappear before things got worse. But Kesha was not letting them escape. "And here," she said, tapping her tablet to move the video forward, "we can see the exact moment when Officer Victor committed felony assault against a federal judge." The courtroom went silent. Those words carried so much weight. "Federal judge," Kesha repeated, letting the words sink into every ear in the room. Victor's body shook. His knees bent. His legs could no longer hold him. He reached out and grabbed the prosecutor's table to keep himself from falling flat to the floor. Kesha's voice was calm now, almost conversational. "But wait," she said, "there's more." She pulled up another file on her tablet. "This," she explained, "is audio from Officer Thompson's body camera. And unlike Victor's, his camera worked perfectly this morning." The speakers crackled, and a new voice filled the room. It was Officer Thompson, whispering to Rodriguez while Victor was beating Kesha earlier. "Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying." Rodriguez's voice answered, cruel and dismissive. "Nah, man. Look at her. Victor knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system." The two officers laughed in the recording. Laughed while a federal judge was being attacked. Everyone in the courtroom gallery turned and stared at Victor. Their eyes were full of disgust and hatred. "Officer Victor," Kesha said, setting down her tablet, "you asked me earlier if I had any employment verification. Proof of my job. Well, I do." She raised her hand and pointed. First, she pointed to the judicial seal, the big official symbol mounted on the wall behind her bench. Then she pointed to the nameplate that sat on her desk. And then she pointed to the large oil painting of her face that hung proudly in the courthouse lobby for all to see. "I have been the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years, Officer Victor," she said. Every word she spoke carried power. "Every case you have ever testified in, every warrant you have ever requested, every search you have ever conducted in this jurisdiction, it has all been under my authority." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Finally, Victor forced words out of his mouth. His voice was thin and broken. "Your Honor, I didn't know." Kesha's eyes burned into him. "You didn't know?" she repeated slowly. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out. You saw a black woman, and you made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, and you decided to abuse your power." She leaned forward, her face serious. "But Officer Victor, there's something else you didn't know." The entire room held its breath. "For the past 6 months," Kesha said clearly, "I have been conducting an investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias in this police department. And I've been working directly with the FBI's Civil Rights Division." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Victor's face turned ghostly white. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "This morning's incident wasn't random," Kesha continued. "You have been under investigation. And today, you gave us the most perfect evidence we could have asked for." She lifted her gavel. "Officer Victor, you once said that actions have consequences. You were right about that." The gavel came down with a crash, loud like thunder. "The court will recess while I consider the appropriate charges." The sound echoed. Victor collapsed into a chair. He looked broken. His career, his reputation, and his freedom, everything he had, was hanging by a tiny thread. 20 minutes later, court resumed. But the room had completely changed. News had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Everyone had heard whispers of the unbelievable reversal happening inside. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, and court reporters quietly filed into the gallery, filling the seats. Everyone wanted to see. Everyone wanted to witness history. Officer Victor now sat in what was clearly the defendant's chair. His back was slouched. His uniform was wrinkled. His face was ashen gray. Beside him sat his lawyer, a nervous public defender named Michael Carter. He had been called in quickly, and he looked terrified. He kept sneaking worried glances at his client. Then, Judge Kesha Naomi walked back to her bench. She carried herself with the same measured dignity she had always shown in thousands of cases. But now, every single eye in the room looked at her differently. This was no longer just a judge. This was a survivor. This was the woman who had been brutally assaulted, and the man who did it was now trembling in front of her. Officer Victor, she began, her voice strong, carrying the weight of 23 years of judicial authority. Before we proceed with the serious criminal charges you now face, I believe this court, and everyone present, deserves to understand exactly who you assaulted this morning. She stood up and stepped out from behind the bench. She wanted to speak directly to the people. My name is Judge Kesha Naomi, she said. I have served as the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. I was appointed to this position by Governor Richardson in 2001, and I was confirmed by the state senate with a unanimous vote. Her voice grew louder and more powerful with every sentence. I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I was editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before becoming a judge, I spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Every eye was locked on her. Even the lawyers in the back leaned forward to listen. As a prosecutor, she said, I specialized in cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and institutional racism. I successfully prosecuted 47 cases against law enforcement officers who abused their authority. She paused and let that number sink in. In my 23 years on this bench, I have presided over more than 15,000 cases. I have sentenced hundreds of defendants, from petty thieves to murderers. I have seen every type of crime, every excuse, every justification. Judge Naomi walked closer to Victor. He shrank back in his seat, trying to make himself smaller. But in all my years of service, Officer Victor, I have never, not once, encountered such a perfect example of everything that is wrong with policing in America. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the faint sound of Victor's labored breathing. You see, Officer Victor, Judge Naomi continued, her voice steady, when you called me a ghetto rat and a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, you were not just assaulting a random citizen. She turned and walked back to her bench. You were assaulting the person who has dedicated her entire career to ensuring that officers like you are held accountable. She opened a thick file that had been waiting for her. This file, she said, contains detailed records of every case you've testified in over the past 5 years. 43 cases, Officer Victor. 43 times you've stood in my courtroom and sworn to tell the truth. She flipped through the pages. 28 of those cases involved defendants who were people of color. In 26 of those cases, you were the arresting officer. And in every single one, Officer Victor, you used remarkably similar language to what you used with me this morning. Her eyes narrowed. Acting erratically. Refusing to comply. Becoming aggressive. Threatening officer safety. The same words. The same excuses. Over and over. Lies wrapped in official language. Judge Naomi snapped the file shut. The sound made Victor flinch. But here's what you didn't know, she continued. For the past 6 months, I've been working with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Justice. We have been investigating systemic patterns of racial bias and misconduct in this police department. Victor's lawyer stopped writing. He just stared at his client, pity filling his eyes. Your name, Officer Victor, appears on a federal watch list, Judge Naomi said firmly. You have been under surveillance. Your communications have been monitored. Your arrest patterns have been analyzed. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharp as a knife. And this morning, you provided us with the most perfect, undeniable evidence of criminal civil rights violations that any prosecutor could dream of. Judge Naomi lifted her gavel again. You assaulted a federal judge while she was performing her official duties. You did so based explicitly on racial hatred, as your own words prove. You then lied under oath about the circumstances of that assault. The gavel hung in the air. Officer Victor, you asked me this morning if I knew my place. Let me tell you exactly what my place is. Her voice filled the room like a storm. My place is on this bench in this courtroom, ensuring that justice is served. My place is holding people like you accountable when you abuse the power you were given. And my place is making sure that what you did this morning is the last act of racial violence you ever commit as a police officer. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the room. Victor finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a woman. He had assaulted justice itself. And justice was about to strike back. Judge Naomi opened another folder. Officer Victor, she said firmly, let's examine your career in law enforcement. Victor's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently, but Victor sat frozen. His hands shook. His lips trembled. According to records from Internal Affairs, you have been the subject of 47 formal complaints during your 15-year career. That averages more than 3 complaints every year. She held up the first paper. Complaint number 1, filed in 2009. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, a 63-year-old grandmother, said you cursed at her during a routine traffic stop and slammed her face into her car hood when she asked for your badge number. The department's investigation said her complaint was unsubstantiated. Interesting, considering we now have video evidence of you using the same language and the same violence. She flipped to another page. Complaint number 12, filed in 2012. Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student, said you planted drugs in his backpack after he refused to give information about his older brother. Once again, the department ruled the complaint unsubstantiated. Victor's breathing grew heavier. Complaint number 23, 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson, a respected cardiologist, said you arrested him outside his own home because you didn't believe a black man could live in that neighborhood. Dr. Johnson spent 6 hours in jail before his attorney secured his release. What did the department say about that complaint, Officer Victor?
I don't.
Victor whispered. Unsubstantiated, Judge Naomi answered for him. Do you see the pattern yet? At that moment, Chief Judge Margaret Carter quietly entered the courtroom. She sat in the front row, her expression grim, taking careful notes. Judge Naomi turned back to her folder. But here's what's truly damning, she said. I compared your complaint record with your arrest statistics, and some very disturbing patterns appeared. She pulled out a large chart and placed it on an easel where everyone could see. Over your 15-year career, you have made more than 1,200 arrests. Out of those, 1,089, 87%, involved people of color. And yet, the demographics of your patrol area are 42% white, 31% Hispanic, and 27% black. She pointed at the chart with a laser pointer. Even more telling, your use of force reports. You used physical force in 63% of your arrests involving people of color, compared to only 12% involving white suspects. Victor's lawyer scribbled notes, perhaps preparing some sort of defense. And here's the most damning statistic of all, Judge Naomi continued. Of your 1,089 arrests of people of color, 432 were dismissed. They were thrown out because of lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or violations of constitutional rights. That's a dismissal rate of nearly 40%. She turned and stared at Victor. Do you know what we call it when a police officer has a 40% dismissal rate due to constitutional violations?
Her voice was sharp.
We call it a pattern of criminal behavior.
The courtroom was very quiet.
The only sound was reporters writing with their pens on paper. But wait, there's more, Judge Naomi said. Her voice was calm, almost like she was talking to a friend. She picked up another paper. I have also looked at how much money your actions have cost the people of this county. She held the paper up. In the last 15 years, this county has paid $2.3 million because of the bad things you did, Officer Victor. That's more money than some small towns have for their whole budget in a year. Victor finally spoke, but his voice was weak and scratchy. Your Honor, I was just doing my job.
Your job?
Judge Naomi stopped him. She pulled out another paper and read from it. When you became a police officer, you promised something. You swore, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution. I will be loyal to it, and I will do my job faithfully and fairly, to the best of my ability. So help me God. She set the paper down. Faithfully and fairly, Officer Victor. Not unfairly. Not based on someone's skin color. Not based on your own dislikes. Judge Naomi walked around the bench and looked at the whole courtroom. What we see here is not just one bad police officer. This is what happens when a system protects officers like Victor. The system throws away complaint after complaint. The system pays out money over and over again, while letting the abuse keep happening. She turned back to Victor. But today, that system didn't protect you, did it? Because today, you chose to hurt someone who had the power to show the truth. Victor put his head in his hands. This morning, Judge Naomi said, you told me that people like me should know our place. Well, now it's time for you to learn your place. Judge Naomi went back to her seat and picked up her gavel. Your place, Officer Victor, is in the defendant's chair, facing the punishment for 15 years of crimes. She hit the gavel with a loud bang. Her black judge's robe flowed around her like armor, strong and powerful. The packed courtroom held its breath, waiting for her next words. Everyone knew something historic was about to happen. Officer Victor, she said, her voice strong, carrying the weight of the law, before I give my final judgment, I want to speak not just to you, but to everyone here today, and everyone who will hear about this. She pointed toward the crowd of lawyers, staff, reporters, and citizens who had come after hearing about this unusual case. This morning started with a simple question. What happens when someone with a badge thinks they are above the law? What happens when years of power and protection create someone who thinks they can attack a federal judge and get away with it? Victor slumped lower in his chair, his life falling apart right before everyone's eyes. The answer, Officer Victor, Judge Naomi said, is standing right in front of you. She picked up her gavel again. On the day she first became a judge, she had special words engraved on it, justice is blind, but she sees all. For 15 years, she said, you have terrorized this community. For 15 years, you have violated people's rights just because they were black or brown. For 15 years, you have disrespected the badge you were supposed to honor. Her voice grew stronger. But your biggest mistake wasn't just one act of brutality. Your biggest mistake was believing the system would always protect you, no matter what you did, no matter how many lives you hurt. Victor looked up, his eyes red and broken. This morning, Judge Naomi continued, you called me a filthy animal. You told me I belonged in a cage. You slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse. You handcuffed me and paraded me around like a criminal. You thought I was just another powerless victim. Judge Naomi leaned forward, her voice dropping so low that everyone had to lean in to hear. But I was never powerless, Officer Victor. And neither were the people you hurt all these years. The only difference is that today, justice finally had a witness. She stood tall again. Based on the evidence we heard in this courtroom, evidence that came from your own mouth, your own actions, and your own camera, I find you guilty of first-degree assault, a felony. The words hit the room like thunder. I find you guilty of assaulting a judge, a federal crime that means at least 5 years in prison. I find you guilty of violating people's civil rights, a federal crime that can mean up to 10 years in prison. And I find you guilty of lying under oath, which is perjury in the first degree. She paused, letting the weight of it all sink in. But Officer Victor, this case isn't only about you. You are a symptom of a much bigger disease that has infected our justice system for too long. She looked back at the gallery. For too long, we have let police officers act without punishment. For too long, we have thrown away complaints, ignored evidence, and paid settlements, while letting the abuse continue. For too long, victims of police brutality were told their stories didn't matter, that their voices didn't count, that justice was not for them. Her voice rose with power. But that ends today. What happened in this courtroom proves that no one, no police officer, no prosecutor, no judge, no politician, is above the law. Victor broke down, shaking with loud sobs. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never meant. Judge Naomi looked at him with something close to pity. Officer Victor, your apology is 15 years and 47 complaints too late. You are only sorry now because you finally got caught by someone who could stop you. She lifted her gavel high. But remember this in your final moments as a free man. Every person you hurt over the years deserved the same justice I am giving today. Every grandmother you insulted, every teenager you planted drugs on, every doctor you arrested for no reason, they all deserve to see you held accountable. She held the gavel in the air. Today, I am not just giving justice for myself. I am giving justice for every victim whose complaint was ignored. I am giving justice for every family who saw their loved one beaten while the system did nothing. Her voice filled the whole courtroom. Officer Victor, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, here is my place, making sure that bullies like you never again hide behind a badge while destroying lives. The gavel came down with a crack like thunder. Officer Victor, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole. Victor fell apart, sobbing uncontrollably. Judge Naomi kept speaking. I am also ordering a full federal investigation into every case you were part of, every arrest you made, every complaint filed against you. The victims you silenced for 15 years will finally be heard. She set down her gavel and looked at the crowd. Let this be a message to every police officer, prosecutor, and official who thinks they can abuse their power. Justice may be blind, but she sees everything. And one day, she comes for everyone. The courtroom exploded in applause that lasted for 5 minutes. Justice had finally been served. 6 months later, the effects of that historic day were still being felt. Victor was in federal prison, serving his 25-year sentence. His badge, pension, and freedom were all gone. The man who once scared a whole community now spent his days in protective custody, finally learning what it felt like to be powerless. But Victor's fall was only the beginning. The federal investigation Judge Naomi ordered uncovered deep corruption in the police department. 12 officers were fired. 4 supervisors were criminally charged. The whole department was placed under federal watch. Chief Judge Margaret Carter made new rules. Any case about police misconduct involving judges had to be reviewed by the federal government. All officers now had to wear body cameras with backup systems, so they could never say the cameras broke again. Most importantly, 432 cases that Victor had ruined were reopened. Dozens of innocent people were released from prison. Hundreds had their charges dropped or sentences reduced. The county paid $8.7 million to Victor's victims, taken directly from the police department's budget. Judge Naomi became a national hero. She was invited to speak at law schools across the country, sharing the story of how one act of violence exposed years of abuse. Her message was always the same: justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. The courthouse was renamed the Justice Naomi Federal Courthouse. A bronze plaque outside read, "Here, justice finally found its voice." The community also changed. People who were once too scared to report police misconduct began coming forward. Oversight boards were created. Police training was completely changed, with Judge Naomi helping to design lessons about constitutional rights and hidden biases. A young law clerk who had watched the trial was inspired to become a civil rights lawyer. She joined the ACLU, fighting similar battles across the nation. The officers who had lied to protect Victor, Rodriguez and Thompson, were fired and charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Their recorded laughter as Victor attacked Judge Naomi became evidence in case studies taught at police academies, showing how dangerous corruption can be. The video of Judge Naomi giving her verdict became the most watched courtroom footage in history, seen by over 50 million people. People all over the world shared their own stories of injustice, inspired by finally seeing real accountability. Today, Victor sits in his prison cell. He probably thinks about the moment he chose to attack a woman because he thought she was powerless. He thought he knew his place in the world. He thought he knew her place. But he was wrong about both. Because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears a judge's robe. Sometimes justice carries a gavel. And sometimes, when the time is right, justice hits back. Never underestimate the power of standing up to bullies.